Good morning, everyone. My name is Brijendra Singh, and we are here to take a small discussion, a small look at the ethics paper that was conducted as part of the UPSC mains for 2022. I will be taking up part of the discussion, and the remaining part of the discussion will be taken up by Mr. Mukul Pathak. Before I start looking at the questions, before we start discussing any of them, let me first briefly try to look at what exactly this paper was about, what an assessment, honest assessment of this paper could have been. Number one, the paper this year was not difficult at all. In fact, I would go to the extent of saying that it was relatively easy because there was no difficult question that was asked whatsoever. If I compare this year's paper with the paper that was conducted last year in 2021, in 2021, the questions that were asked expected you to have very specific knowledge, very specific content. Otherwise, you would not have been able to do justice to the questions or to the answers. This year, on the other hand, to a large extent, the paper was extremely general in nature. A person who applies his or her common sense, a person who is able to think clearly during the exam, will be able to do justice to almost every question. With the exception of a couple of terms that might come in between, the rest of the paper was very simple, very easy, nothing very difficult. But problem is that while the paper was easy, it was not only lengthy, it was extremely lengthy. The first time that I looked at this paper, I was looking at it on a Word document and I just counted the number of words. The case studies themselves are 2,500 words long. And this is ironical because in all 6 case studies put together, the word limit allowed to a student is 1,500 words. To write answers worth 1,500 words, I am first expected to read 2,500 words. This is what I say to the students also, that if you compare this with your CSAT paper, in the CSAT paper where you have to do reading comprehension, you are expected to solve 20 passages on average. And on average, a passage is between 80 to 90 words. Even if I increase that and say 100 words, that's a total of 2,000 words. In 2,000 words, you are able to answer somewhere between 25 to 30 questions. And again, you're given only 2 hours to do that, along with maths, along with verbal reasoning. In contrast, in the ethics paper, there are 2,500 words given only for case studies. In fact, if you look at section A also, many of the questions were such that there's a lot of, we'll see some of them over here, there's a lot of information given that was not needed. Even if you don't give the information, the basic essence of the question remains the same. Now, there are 2 things over here that students need to understand. Number one, why is the paper being made deliberately lengthy? Deliberately lengthy. Why are they doing that? Because if the paper is lengthy, you have limited time to respond. You can just about read the question carefully. Immediately you'll have to start writing, otherwise you will not be able to complete the paper. But the more quickly you write, the lesser response time I give you, the less you can frame your answers, the less you can hide your true intentions. The faster I make you respond, the faster I make you write, the higher the probability that your true intentions, your true values will be reflected on paper. And that ultimately is the purpose of the exercise. To try and understand not what you're pretending to be, but who you truly, genuinely are. Number one, that's the first thing. Number two, students should understand, and this is a slightly unfortunate part, and this is what a lot of students are being complaining about. Students I know who've written their mains this year, especially students who are in the services, people who are giving the exam again to improve their rank, people who've written their mains maybe in the past, these students say that, sir, when the paper becomes very lengthy, there is no distinction between a good or an experienced student as compared to a new student or a novice. A student, imagine for a moment that there's a student who's giving his 4th attempt. In the last 3 attempts, he's cleared his mains twice and he's given his interview twice. He's cleared his prelims thrice and he's given his mains twice. Now, in these circumstances, this person is experienced. This person is good. He's gone through the entire syllabus in detail a couple of times. He's actually written the exam also. Despite doing that, when you give such a lengthy paper, even this person has very little time to respond. On the other hand, a novice, a person who's given only 1 attempt. In the first attempt is clear, the prelims. When he's sitting in the exam, his in-depth knowledge, his in-depth understanding of the subject will not be very good. So effectively, between the two, we are creating a level playing field. Now, the novice will be happy about this, and the experienced person, the older student will be a little disappointed in this. Unfortunately, in either case, you do not have a choice. The choice lies with the recruiter, the choice lies with the UPSC, but this is something you can understand about it. Third, this is what I was just saying over here. There were multiple questions that were asked in case studies. And since there were multiple questions, it was very difficult to add depth. Most of the questions that were given in case studies, they carried 4 to 5 questions each. Now the word limit is 250 words. When there are 4 or 5 questions asked in every case study and I have to finish the answer within 50 words, that means on average, I'm getting 50 words to write per question. In 50 words, now I must have 2 or 3 points, distinct points for every answer, which means that if I write even 3 points and write them very briefly, let's say just about 10 to 12 words each, even then my word limit is exhausted. Which is why again, it becomes difficult to add depth. You only have to look at the issue on a very broad or a very general, on a very superficial level. As long as you can do that, as long as your terminology is correct, as long as your choice of words is correct, the answer will have the required quality and the examiner will have to give you marks. But if you're a candidate, if I assume that this is the pattern the UPSC is likely to follow, they've done this last year in 2021, they've done this again this year in 2022. If this is a pattern they're likely to follow, it becomes absolutely essential for a student to focus first on completing the paper. There are again some students that I've spoken to who have not attempted 20 marks, who've not been able to attempt 30 marks in the paper. Or even if they attempted them right at the end and did it very quickly, very fast. If you're not able to complete the paper, this is an unnecessary 0 out of 30 or 0 out of 20 that you're earning. But how do I ensure that I'm able to complete the paper? Now, a bulk of your time is going to be spent in reading the paper, which is why it is very important that when you write, you learn how to be concise, you learn how to be precise, you learn how not to beat around the bush. One very bad habit that students have is that they sometimes overindulge in some areas. There's a question that comes, there's a case study that comes which I'm familiar with. I know what I can write here. I have some good expressions to add. I have some good quotes. I have some good examples. So what do? I spend more and more time beautifying one answer, not realizing that overindulgence in one will come at the expense of others. If you beautify one question too much or one answer too much, there's a high probability that 1 or 2 other questions you will not be able to do justice to. And honestly speaking, even if you beautify an answer, beyond a certain point, the examiner cannot give you marks. A student who writes a very good answer might get 7. A student who writes an average answer might get a slightly above average answer, might get 5.5. But to get these 1.5 extra marks in that one question, there is always the possibility that in another 2 questions, you end up getting only 3 or 4. Simple maths tells you that this is not in your favor. Which is why, one way or the other, when you're practicing, ensure that you focus that number one, your first priority is to ensure that the paper, one way or the other, is completed. Now, that's a broad look at the paper for this year. Now, let me start with the discussion. As I said earlier also, half the paper I'll be discussing and the other half Mr. Pathak will take up. Now, to start with the discussion over here, let me start with question number 1A. Question number 1A says that wisdom, and see, the question was so long that I can't even put all of it over here. It becomes extremely lengthy. So lengthy that reading it itself is going to take me 1 to 1.5 minutes. But the core itself is the part that I've underlined. The core itself is very brief. A deliberate attempt being made to ensure that students do not have too much time in which they frame their answers or pretend to frame an ideal answer. But the question says, wisdom consists in knowing what to reckon with, what to overlook. An officer engrossed with the periphery, ignoring core issues, is not rare in the bureaucracy. Do you agree that such preoccupation of an administrator leads to a travesty of justice to the cause of effective service delivery and good governance? Critically evaluate. Now, when we look at bureaucrats, when we look at civil servants in the country, there are certain fundamental expectations we have from them. But simultaneously, it is also important for them to ensure that the everyday running of the bureaucracy is not compromised. To give you a small example before we look at any of this, there is an IAS officer somewhere in the country. This IAS officer has one simple intention, that in the area of his jurisdiction, the third COVID vaccination should be completed in a time-bound manner. Every person who is eligible to get a third COVID dose should get it in a time-bound manner. He is focusing upon that. He is coordinating with different departments, different officers. At that time, he knows that at the moment, it is going to take him 3 weeks to complete this exercise, if you give him the time, the resources, and the ability to focus on this matter. But in that time, there are two incidents that happen in his jurisdiction again. Number one, the Chief Minister of the state, his helicopter has some malfunction and lands in this area. Because of this, and let's assume that the Chief Minister has to stay here for about 1.5 days. After that, as a token of recognition, the Chief Minister invites him to the state capital. He has to go there, meet the Chief Minister and come back. Now, basic courtesy demands that you cannot deny, you cannot refuse the Chief Minister. And yet, for that period of time, a lot of resources, lot of manpower, lot of time will be diverted towards this issue rather than the core issue that the officer ideally would have wanted to address. Or, let's take another example. There is a bypoll in this area. Whatever is the relevant constituency, there's a bypoll that has to be conducted, which ends up taking up 3 to 6 weeks of the officer's time. It's very easy to complain that they're not focusing on core issues, and yet it is important to understand that we have limited resources. Now, that is the essence of this question, that they focus on peripheral issues but ignore the core issues. Now, what can peripheral issues be? Peripheral issues, for example, could be insisting on procedural compliance, that you're not concerned with achieving the objective as much as you're concerned with fulfilling the procedures. And what is the core issue? That whatever these procedures are, whatever we've established, ultimately long-term sustained public welfare should be ensured. What is a procedural issue? Complicated procedures. What is the core issue over here? That procedures should be simplified. The law should be so simple that it can be read and understood by everyone. Procedures should be so simple that people don't have to find a way, a means to try and overcome those procedures, to try and overlook, to violate those procedures. In India, why do we complain that many people do not take the help of the law? Because the law itself is extremely difficult to understand, is even more difficult to get access to. Third, what is a peripheral issue? That communication within the bureaucracy very often is not open, it is silo-based, where only a few people within the bureaucracy take decisions without necessarily relating them to the environment and to the population that they're supposed to serve. On the other hand, what is the core issue? That there must be transparency not only within the government but also towards the people. In our country, for example, when we talk about transparency, we usually focus upon the people. We ignore transparency within the government itself. In the government, if I look at, for example, the time that COVID happened in India, there were different regulations being established by different states, which is why maintaining everyday functioning, traveling across the country, getting access to healthcare, everything became unnecessarily, needlessly complicated. Fourth, resorting to the use of authority. But what we ideally need, that is what is the peripheral issue, what we actually need is participative governance. As far as possible, it should be a collaborative approach which puts citizens first. Citizen-centric administration, citizen-centric governance. Now, when the bureaucracy starts focusing only on peripheral issues, what is the problem? That the system now becomes a huge machinery where every single cog, every department, every ministry, every bureaucrat, every civil servant who's working only tries to be faithful to its own desk. I take decisions not taking the larger picture into mind. I take decisions which I believe will promote my well-being, will promote the image of my department. That is why we say you should not focus only on peripheral issues, more importantly focus on the core issues that you are trying to achieve. Now, when they do this or when they behave in this manner, what is the impact it has on good service delivery? What is the impact it has on good governance? And of course, we also have to add a couple of examples here. Now for good governance, we say there are 8 elements that are involved. For good service delivery, again, we say there are at least 5 basic criteria, RATER, that you must satisfy. But I have only 150 words to write. I have limited time. So for each of them, let's say we just pick up 3 of them that are relevant here, that are most relevant here. For example, in good service delivery, what do we need? We need a good service experience and a good service outcome. Number 2, we want good personal attributes of the delivery personnel. In this case, for example, your civil servants. Number 3, the service should be delivered with an element of courtesy, and where clients are not satisfied, there should be the presence of a grievance redressal mechanism, accessible, functional grievance redressal mechanism. Now, similarly, what do we want for good governance? There are 8 characteristics, but let's say 3 of them. We want transparency. We want responsiveness on the part of the government. What is responsiveness? That you should respond to genuine needs of the public rather than taking decisions that are only for administrative convenience. And of course, we want equity and inclusiveness. All people should be treated equally, or as equally as possible, as equitably as possible, I would say. Now, when we have to give examples here, where do you give examples from? Where do you give illustrations from? In simple English, we say that you should never waste a crisis. For the next few years to come, any student who's giving the civil services exam in almost every subject will find an abundance of examples from the COVID pandemic. Any way that you want to look at it, whether it is in medical terms, whether it is the use of technology, whether it is in economic terms, whether it is in ethical terms, you'll find an abundance of examples. For instance, what was the experience during COVID? Equity was being violated. How was equity being violated? While rich, powerful, influential people were hoarding essentials, hoarding sanitizers, hoarding medicines, and while they were flouting rules, at the same time, small petty vendors were being beaten up by the police. Earlier we said that one of the peripheral issues that you focus on is only the use of authority. You're not participative, you're not citizen-centric. And this we saw most clearly when the police very high-handedly was harassing, was victimizing, even physically assaulting petty vendors. And it was not that they were flouting rules. They were selling vegetables, they were selling food, which is an essential commodity which people needed to get. Similarly, a lot of paperwork and a lot of paperwork harassment at airports. One of the strangest facts that we witnessed during the COVID pandemic, during various protocols, various restrictions, was that when you enter an airport, you're expected to be extremely careful. You're supposed to maintain decent physical distancing. You are expected to wear a mask at all times and various other protocols. Now, this is for your safety, which we completely agree with. Nobody denies that. Strange part was, now, what does this do? This places the people at an inconvenience. If my flight is at, let's say, 10 o'clock in the morning, ordinarily I would have to report at 8 o'clock. Now, I would have to report at 7, maybe at 6:30, because clearing airport security will take much longer. Surprisingly and ironically, I would say, after doing all of this, after maintaining the protocol, maintaining the distancing, at the end of the day, you're still sitting in a small metal tube. And you're breathing in the same metal tube with dozens of other people who are occupying the flight. And the strangest part was that while I'm forcing you to maintain this distancing in the airport, inside the flight, I'm asking you to eat food. I'm giving you, meals that are being served by the airlines. But to eat a meal, I'll have to take off my mask. I'll have to breathe normally. So what was the point of all of that? Similarly, paperwork harassment at the airports, one declaration after the other, one form after the other. What does this do? This means that the service experience itself has been extremely poor. Another example that you can give here is logic-defying rules. Rules that are made. Earlier we said that communication within the bureaucracy is not good. There is silo-based communication which often is not relevant or is not well connected to the realities. Last year when the Kumbh happened, on the one hand, you are allowed to go and swim in the Ganges, or at least take a dip in the Ganges with hundreds and thousands of people around you. At the same time, you are not allowed to go swimming in a swimming pool. Personal cars, when people were driving, at that time, they were expected, even if there is one occupant of a car, the person is compelled to drive, and if they're compelled to drive wearing a mask. And if they are not wearing a mask, they could be immediately stopped and immediately challaned. The Supreme Court of India had to intervene to ensure that people were not harassed in this manner. What are you doing? Again, the service experience is very bad. There's an absence of an element of courtesy. No grievance redressal mechanisms. I can't complain about it. You're not responding to the needs of the people. You are taking decisions completely isolated from the ground realities. Similarly, there was in India, repeatedly in states across the country, there was a night curfew. But the surprising part is, a night curfew makes very little sense when most commercial establishments have shut down. It makes very little sense because the longer the hours of the night curfew, the greater the probability that more people will step out in the daytime. I do have to go to a bank. I do have to buy essentials. I do have to go out for some work or the other. Instead of imposing these night curfews, one wonders why the timings of these establishments were not staggered so that they could function for a longer period of time, and the density of population, density of people going to any establishment at any point in time could again be distributed throughout the course of the day, or at least over a longer span of time. Similarly, the prosecution for airing pleas on social media. The last part has got cut out. The choice of only two genders. When Arogya Setu were launched, in the initial phases, if you try to register yourself where it said gender or where it said sex, there were only two options, male and female. What about transgenders? That's lakhs of people who will not be able, who now cannot fill up the form, cannot register themselves merely because their sex has not even been mentioned. What is this called? This is called a violation of equity. This is called a lack of inclusiveness. This is why we say that where civil servants are not, and let me just briefly go back. This is why we say that where civil servants focus on the periphery, where they ignore core issues, this will have an adverse impact on the quality of service delivery and the quality of governance that is provided to them. Now, so far the question also says critically evaluate, but as far as possible try to be in the ethics paper, in the essay paper also, you are given marks for optimism. And here please remember, this is a government exam. You are aspiring to be a civil servant. As far as possible, don't be excessively critical. So where we started the discussion is where you will conclude your answer by adding just one small thought right at the end, that you must understand that the government has very limited resources. It has increased scrutiny. What do you mean by increased scrutiny? That if a civil servant does even the smallest of things wrong, immediately he is open to very, very critical criticism. He is open to a lot of punishment. And there are unforeseen and unprecedented challenges that they have to deal with. Today, it might be very easy to say that there were some rules that the government made in India which did not seem to have too much logic, which seemed to be a little irrational. But remember that at that point in time, nobody knew how this pandemic would pan out. It's been 2.5 years since the lockdown happened in India. And in the last two and a half years, we've learned a lot about the disease. We've had the safety of having vaccination. At that point, we were not sure. Since the government has limited resources, since there is a lot of scrutiny, since there are unforeseen, unprecedented challenges, we must empathize with the government and with civil servants, because a lot of their energy, a lot of their efforts will be diverted towards firefighting. And when they are engaged in firefighting, it becomes somewhat difficult for them to focus on the core issues, to do justice to the core issues. This is what you write. And again, one word I'll tell you over here. Please try to, even when the question says critically evaluate, try to maintain a fair balance. Over here, for example, the bulk of your answer can try to emphasize, can try to highlight the deficiencies or the shortcomings of the government. But there must always be at least one thought, one remark, which conveys appreciation, which conveys gratitude for what the government, for what the bureaucracy tries to do for us on a daily basis. If we were placed in the same circumstances, we might not be able to do the same. That is question number 1A. Question number 1B, and I think these are the only two questions that still had, some element of depth that was required. After that, the questions became excessively easy, excessively simple. Question 1B says that apart from intellectual competence and moral qualities, empathy and compassion are other vital attributes that facilitate civil servants to be more competent in tackling crucial issues or in taking critical decisions. Explain with suitable illustrations. Now, there are 4 terms given over here. So, very briefly, and again, time is of the essence because there are only 3 hours and the paper is very lengthy. So, as briefly as you can, just list out what these attributes are and what is their relevance. For example, what is intellectual competence? Very briefly, your ability to organize conceptual, semantic. What is semantic? Related to language. Conceptual, semantic, and procedural knowledge. What is procedural knowledge? Related to your laws, rules, and regulations. Why do we need this? Because this alone will ensure that your rules are well known, your rules are not violated, they are not flouted. And second, this way, a bureaucrat will understand the various options, the multiple options that are available in any given situation. Second term given over here is moral qualities. What are moral qualities? The ability to take decisions on issues that are not governed by the law, that are not governed by rules. The ability to take decisions in these kind of matters which promote collective public welfare. In simple words, we say that ethics begins where the law ends. Now, if ethics begins where the law ends, what does that mean? That there will be many issues that a citizen or a bureaucrat, more importantly, faces where there is no law that tells you what you should or should not do, no law that tells you what is permitted or what is prohibited. In these circumstances where the decision ultimately depends upon your discretion, depends upon your judgment, it is very important that you take decisions where you regulate yourself, where you don't misuse your discretion or authority, and take decisions that promote collective public welfare. Why is this important? Again, to ensure judicious use of discretion and to prevent any misuse of authority. Similarly, third word that is given over here is empathy. What is empathy? The ability to understand another person's thoughts, another person's feelings in a situation from their point of view rather than from your own. Why is empathy important? Empathy is important because it will help you understand different facets, different elements, different perspectives given in the same issue. When we look at a problem, when we look at a situation, one of our biggest problems is that we might be looking at it from only one point of view. But when you're empathetic towards the problems, towards the suffering of others, it enables you to understand the same issue from another perspective. This now increases your ability to solve the problem better. And this also improves responsiveness towards legitimate, genuine public needs. Because once you empathize with people, you realize how important it is for you to give a solution which is effective, which is meaningful, and which is time bound. And finally, one last term given over here, which is compassion. What is compassion? Selfless concern for the well-being of others. If you are compassionate, why is compassion needed? Because it is only when you are compassionate that you will be proactive in your decision making. You will not wait for people to come and ask you for a solution. You will not wait for someone to order you to do the right thing. As far as possible, you will try to take an initiative on your own. And number two, this is when an officer is genuinely compassionate, where they are more likely to go beyond the call of duty. Now, these are your 4 attributes. Question more importantly is, and this is why they are needed, this is how they help you in addressing crucial issues or taking critical decisions. But we also have to give examples. Limited space. So again, let me just add 2 examples here. Number 1, and when I'm starting, I'll start with a negative example, what the lack of these attributes is likely to do. For instance, now this case that I'm talking about here, this first example, I'm borrowing from something that happened in April 2021 in the state of Arunachal Pradesh. We will not name the state here. We will not name the bureaucrat. We will not give any reference to that. But we'll just borrow the essence of the case. What is the essence? That at that point, there was a family that was guilty of violating wedding timings during COVID. The actual case, for those who are not aware of it, the DM of Agartala was out on a I would say inspection when he realized that there was a wedding that was going on after 10 o'clock. The district administration had clearly told people that weddings must be concluded by 10 o'clock at night or have the wedding in your own house. This wedding was going on beyond 10 o'clock. So what did the DM do? He got extremely angry. Unfortunately, he was not able to keep his emotions in control. Now, the intentions here might be correct. What is the intention? To ensure public welfare, to ensure that people don't contract the virus, to ensure that people remain safe. But the manner in which you execute those intentions, that was equally important. What did he do? Problem here was that he manhandled the family. If you've seen the video online, even when they showed him the permission, he took the paper, he took the permission given by the government, tore it and threw it in the air very arrogantly. Now, this is not what is expected of a good civil servant, and arrogant show of authority. Now, in this case, to some extent, we can say that you might possess intellectual competence. To some extent, not completely. But what is completely lacking are moral qualities, empathy, and compassion. And here, what could have been a better response? When you realize that they were flouting the rules, instead of what should I say, misbehaving with them, behaving arrogantly with them, very simply what could have been done was to give them a strict warning to conclude the ceremonies as early as possible. And after they have broken the rule, they have broken the law. After that, enforce penalties upon them which can come under the ambit of the law. Under any circumstance, you cannot manhandle them, you cannot push them, you cannot misbehave with them. Now, that is what happens when these attributes are missing. When these attributes are present, what does that lead to? That leads to prison reforms at Tihar jail. Now, again, if I want, I can give a bulk of the credit to a lady called Kiran Bedi. But Kiran Bedi, despite all her merits, was at Tihar jail a long time back. And in the intervening period, there have been many other officers who've contributed in their own way. Instead of naming one person and discrediting the others, very simply, just talk about prison reforms. And what kind of reforms? For example, yoga and meditation. For example, having what is a panchayat with inmates? Consultations where the prison authorities sit with some inmates who've been chosen as representatives of the other prisoners. They sit down together, they discuss the issues that they are facing, and mutually they try to come up with mutually acceptable solutions. This also takes the form of providing them skill courses, giving them vocational opportunities, the ability. If I remember correctly, I think Tihar has 45 or 49 vocational courses that are available for inmates. What are you doing? You are genuinely trying to focus not on retribution, not on revenge, but on reformation. That when a prisoner leaves Tihar jail tomorrow, there's a much greater probability that he'll be able to assimilate peacefully within society. And when you take a decision like this, almost every attribute that we were mentioning earlier will be found present in the decision. An officer who takes these kind of decisions, who promotes these kind of initiatives, possesses intellectual competence, he's working within the ambit of the law. He possesses moral qualities, he's using his discretion well. This person possesses empathy, possesses compassion towards the suffering of the prisoners and towards their effective resettlement, rehabilitation in the future. Which is why we say that these four qualities are very important for any public servant, for any civil servant. That's question 1B. Question number 2, 3 and 4, Mr. Pathak will take up. Let me now start with question number 5A. Now, question 5A, again, there was a lot of information that was given. The text of the question was very long. Let me just focus on the key part of the text. Russia-Ukraine war has been going on for many months. Different nations have taken different decisions, keeping in view their national interest. The key part of the question, what are the ethical issues to be considered while launching the war and in the continuation of the war so far? And it says, illustrate with justification. Here, please note one thing. You are being asked to illustrate with a justification, which means explain the ethical issue. It does not mean give examples. We are not asking you for illustration. We are asking you to illustrate with a justification what are the ethical issues. So, focus on the justification. The ethical issues will be easy to identify. 1. Second, in questions like these, please keep in mind the very fine distinction between ethical issues and legal issues. If I want, I can write over here, when Russia and Ukraine go to war, what can I talk about? I can talk about the violation of sovereignty. I can talk about interference in the domestic affairs of other nations. I can talk about the violation of the right of self-determination and so on. But then this becomes an answer on international relations. It becomes an answer on political science to an extent. We are talking about ethics. So what are the ethical issues? Number one, and as our Prime Minister said a few days back, this is not an era of war. A century back, 2 centuries back, if there were differences, if there were disputes between two countries, legitimate or illegitimate disputes, one of the only mechanisms available was to wage war. But today is not the era of war. Era of war. Why is it not an era of war? Why has Russia done the wrong thing? Because even if you had differences, even if you had genuine concerns, you could have used diplomacy. You could have used mutual dialogue. You could have used mutually beneficial trade. And of course, today we have n number of international institutions that can assist in negotiation, that can assist in mediations. Another ethical issue in this is that you should always wage war when there is a reasonable hope of success. Now, if I talk about Russia and Ukraine in the month of February 2022, everyone would say, and to some extent correctly say, that Russia will overpower Ukraine. There is not reasonable, there's a significant chance of success for the Russians. But as this war has continued now, it is leading to a resurgence on the part of the Ukrainian forces, where more and more territories that had been occupied by the Russians are now being reclaimed, retaken by the Ukrainians. That's the second ethical issue, that there should be at least some reasonable hope of success. Otherwise, what is the point of the war? It's futile. It causes a lot of damage and promises you no gains. Number three, it is very important, and this now is from the perspective of other nations. This is from the perspective of other companies, other systems, other institutions. What is the ethical issue? That you must maintain the categorical imperative. Do for others as you would expect them to do for you. What does that mean in this case? That if something similar was happening to you, if your territory, if your sovereignty, if your independence was being violated by other countries or some other country, what would you expect others to do? Of all the things I would expect them to do, one thing I would not want from others is silence. The worst thing that you can do at a time of crisis is to maintain your silence. Here, what is the justification? That every country has the duty to respond when the sovereignty of any nation in the world is being violated. And how do you do that? How do you respond? Please ensure that you vote, don't abstain, or don't vote in the wrong side. In February, for example, India abstained from voting against Russia, and just last month, India voted against Russia, very clearly exemplifying its stand, very clearly illustrating the fact that it is not happy with what is happening between Russia and Ukraine. This emphasizes again what the Prime Minister said a few days back, that this is not an era of war. Number two, how else do you respond? Through economic actions. Now here please note, we are using the word economic actions. We are not using the word economic sanctions, because sanctions would be narrower in perspective. Economic actions can be taken not only by nations and countries, they can also be taken by corporate houses. N number of corporate houses across the world today have started withdrawing their operations from Russia, have stopped their businesses in Russia, at least for the time being. Why? In very clear disapproval of what the Russian government has done. Fourth, another ethical issue. I think in the answer you should be able to write 3 or 4, but let's discuss a couple of more also. Number 4, basic human rights are being violated. As the war continues, and especially when it goes on for longer, not only in Russia, not only in Ukraine, but on a global level, people's livelihoods are being affected, energy crisis is looming, inflation is increasing, and a major portion of the blame goes to the Russia-Ukraine war. As the conflict escalates, as the conflict continues, it will affect everyone. Why? Because we are living in a world that is interconnected and that is interdependent. Fifth and finally, the ethical issue over here, national interest on the one hand and global peace on the other. It is very important that every nation commits itself to maintaining a balance between whatever promotes a national interest and whatever is needed for global peace. Why should you commit yourself to maintaining this balance? Because sustainable national interest cannot be promoted, cannot be maintained without global peace. Unless and until there is peace and prosperity in the world, or at least in most parts of the world, no single nation can afford to grow stronger and to grow more prosperous. So again, explain about three or four, I think more than four you won't be able to manage in the word limit, but 3 or 4 points over here: the ethical issues and an appropriate justification. Question number 5B, and that's why I said this paper is not difficult. Question number 5B was literally, I would say, a gift that was given by the UPSC to the students. There's nothing that you have to do. These kind of questions in between for a few years had been discontinued. These are questions where they give you 5 terms. Word limit is 30 words per term, so you have just about enough space to write clearly what the definition or the understanding of the term is. And 5 simple terms, briefly, what do they mean? First term, constitutional morality. Now, yes, here someone or the other will ask, should I also mention examples? For each of them, can I also give an example? If you can be very brief, if you can be very concise and fit it into the word limit, then do so. Otherwise, don't waste your time, don't waste your words. The question, very simply, if I look at the actual language of the question over here says, write a short note on these terms. If I'm writing a short note, examples technically are not needed. But if you think you have a very good example, a very relevant example, mention it, but again, within the word limit, briefly and not wasting time. Don't beautify one answer or 2 terms over here at the expense of other questions. First, what is constitutional morality? The use of constitutional principles, constitutional values as benchmarks for ethical decision making. Anything that contradicts the Constitution is considered or is viewed as null and void. In class, students ask that when I have a doubt between 2 courses of action, if I have a doubt as to which course of action I should take, how do I take that decision? And what do we tell them? 1, it should be aligned with your Constitution. Number 2, it should promote public welfare. And this understanding of constitutional morality, where do you get it from? Most notably from the preamble, fundamental rights and duties, and from the directive principles. Another term, conflict of interest. All I can do in a question like this is just give the definition. What is a conflict of interest? A situation in which an individual has a personal interest and the personal interest is strong enough to influence or, more appropriately, compromise the performance of his official duties. In simple words, a conflict between personal interest on the one hand and professional or public interest on the other. Now, I can give another 3 examples if I want over here, but that is not the demand of the question. This question neither demands nor deserves a lengthy answer. Stick to the point, give the correct understanding, and move on. Another term is probity in public life. What is probity in public life? Upholding the higher standards in personal, professional, and public dealings. Whether it is with your family, whether it is with your colleagues, or whether it is with citizens at large, upholding the highest ethical standards. And regardless of any temptations, regardless of any threats. As far as possible, we are talking about probity in public life. When you are in public life, ensure that through any action that you're taking, you maintain the dignity of your office. Ensure that you are capable of leading by example. Ensure that you're not misusing your discretion or your authority. If you're capable of doing that, then we'll say that you're upholding probity in your public dealings, in your public life. 2 more terms given here. Again, very simple question. Number 5, what are the challenges of digitalization? Honestly, it seems a little odd putting this kind of a question in the ethics paper. You can obviously, digitalization does have very strong ethical dimensions, but you can't ask it as a note. They should have framed a proper question on it, but nonetheless. Challenges of digitalization. Number 1, digital divide. Where is the digital divide? Rural and urban, rich and poor, literate, illiterate, and so on. Number 2, poor infrastructure, low internet speeds, poor human capital, lack of people to be able to adapt to changing systems, cyber crimes, cyber security, and so on. And finally, dedication to duty. What is dedication to duty? The ability to apply everything that you have, all your time, all your energy, all your efforts, all your resources ability to apply everything that you have completely and entirely to your duty. Dedication to duty is not bound by any formal obligation. What is a formal obligation? It is not bound by a rule. It is not based on an order. It is not based on the letter of the law. More importantly, it is inspired by a sense of responsibility. If I am dedicated to my duties, I will not wait for orders. I will not do something merely because it is commanded by law. I'll do something because I hold myself responsible for the consequences of my action. Simple question, 5 terms and small, brief notes on them within the word limit. Question number 6, finally, from the theory part, 2 last questions, 6A and 6B. As I said earlier in the discussion, this paper was very simple, very straightforward. Use simple common sense. You must understand the concepts correctly though, yes. Students, sometimes they come up and they say that, sir, you say use common sense, but when I write answers, you don't give me marks. You've even given me 2 out of 20. But, what am I doing wrong? Problem is that common sense is not very common, which is not to, criticize anyone, which only means that you use your common sense also. You first need to understand the concepts correctly. This question over here says that whistleblowers run the risk of grave danger and victimization. At whose hands? At the hands of the people who are accused, or at the hands of powerful vested interest who would not like it if the status quo was changed, if the prevailing situation was changed. In these circumstances, what policy measures can you suggest to strengthen the protection mechanism to safeguard whistleblowers? Now, one small thing that you have to understand here, a person who's a whistleblower, a person who makes a public interest disclosure, why would this person be victimized? Why would this person face danger? Why would this person be harassed? This person is likely to face danger, is likely to be harassed for one simple reason, that this person's identity might be revealed to others. If the identity was confidential, I can make a complaint very comfortably, very easily, and there is no, there is no chance, there is no risk of persecution, of violence, of retaliation, or of harassment. Which is why, what will you recommend over here? Number 1, allow anonymous reporting. In India, for example, under the Whistleblower Protection Act, it is mandatory to share your personal details, without which you cannot file a complaint. Now, once I share my details are not shared with anyone else. I reveal these details to the competent authority, but they're not shared with anyone else unless it becomes important to share these details for the purposes of collecting information. Now, this part is a little strange because the competent authority has the authority to summon any person, to examine any document for the purposes of discovering the truth. Then under any circumstance, why would it become important to reveal someone's identity? Why do we not want the identity to be revealed? Because if the identity is revealed, and now if something happens to the whistleblower, it will discourage people across the system, across the country, from ever making these kind of complaints, ever making these kind of disclosures again. So, consider allowing anonymous complaints anonymous reporting of complaints and wrongdoing. Number 2, maintain the confidentiality of the whistleblower's details before, during, and after the investigation. Before, of course, otherwise he could be harmed. During, again could be harmed. Most importantly, even after the investigation. If a person complains about someone who is very powerful, a powerful vested interest, the investigation is executed well, the person, whoever is the guilty person, is appropriately punished. But even later, if the whistleblower's identity is disclosed, he may still be open for retaliation. He may still be victimized, may still be harassed. And if he is harassed, if any misfortune befalls him, in the future, more and more people will be less likely to come forward and complain. Number 3, establish statutory and mandatory provisions for providing protection. Again, the Whistleblower Protection Act says that where a person makes a public interest disclosure, if needed, where required, this person can be provided protection. But this depends upon the discretion of the people concerned. Where discretion is involved. Now, I am a low-level employee working in an organization. In my organization, somewhere at the middle level, there's a lot of corruption. I complain about it. But when I complain about it, it is highly unlikely that my department will assist me in trying to take them to court, in trying to take them to task, which is why it provides statutory and mandatory provisions, and where the protection has to be provided, make it mandatory that it should be provided by an independent agency, not the agency, not the department where the complaint or where the wrongdoing originated. Similarly, number 4, define the scope and nature of actions that can be perceived as retaliation, victimization, or harassment. It's very easy to say that a person is being harassed or is being victimized, but what exactly constitutes that victimization? If I ask a person to stay back in office for 3 hours beyond the stipulated office timings, is that victimization, or is that my desire to work hard? If I transfer a person 3 times in the next 1 year within the government also, is that a sign of victimization, or is that because of that particular employee's inefficiency or incapabilities, incompetence? So define very clearly what would constitute victimization and harassment, because if you do not define it, we cannot prevent it from happening. And number 5, where the person is complaining, there should be provisions for reporting retaliation or victimization after the complaint is filed. 5 measures that you can suggest with a little more explanation as to what policy measures we can take to ensure that whistleblowers are protected and safeguarded. Before I move on, one last point I'll make over here, one small point over here. Someone or the other will always ask, should I here make a comparison or provide an analysis of the Whistleblower Protection Act and the Act after it was amended? Answer is no. We are asking you a very simple, a very general question, that there is a fear of victimization, there's a fear of danger. How can this danger be reduced? How can whistleblowers be protected? So focus most importantly on the protection of these whistleblowers, preventing their victimization or their harassment. Question 6b similarly. Simple question, straightforward question, but one essence, these 2 sentences here are the ones that I actually need you to focus on. The question talks about corporate social responsibility. Again, like I said earlier, gives a lot of information which doesn't directly focus upon the question itself. It says that corporate sector is generating a lot of wealth and unemployment, but it has had an unprecedented, adverse, negative onslaught on climate, environmental sustainability, and the living conditions of human beings. CSR, to what extent do you believe that CSR is efficient and sufficient to fulfill the social roles and responsibilities needed? Now, here what do? Here, when you have to look at it, there are just 2 sentences that I need you people to understand well. You write this and your marks will always improve. Now, it said, to what extent is CSR efficient and sufficient? And before I go to the question, let me first talk about you people. One very dirty word that students preparing for this exam use frequently is that they say that something they're reading, some subject they're preparing for, they say that, sir, if I read this particular book, is it enough? If I go through those notes, are they adequate? If I prepare in this manner, if I write those answers, is it sufficient? These words, why am I calling them dirty words? Because when you're preparing for an exam of this magnitude, with the kind of scope that this exam has, nothing is enough, nothing is adequate, nothing is sufficient. No matter how much you study, if you're a genuine candidate, there is always scope for doing a little more. We don't say that, you exceed your capabilities, you push yourself right to the brink, but there is always scope for a little more study, a little more refinement. Similarly, in corporate social responsibility, what do we say? That when it is judiciously practiced, it can bring positive changes in reducing the adverse impact of corporate activities. Where is the adverse impact felt? It could be felt on healthcare, could be felt on nutrition, could be felt on the environment. If judiciously practiced, CSR can significantly reduce the adverse impact. But, and this is the key part now, CSR may never be sufficient, but its efficiency can always be improved. Write this one sentence in your answer and your marks in this answer will improve substantially. What does this mean? In simple words, I can also say that with corporate social responsibility activities, there is always scope for improvement. No matter how much you might have done, no matter how much you might have improved these initiatives in the past, there is always scope for improvement. So say that they may never be sufficient. The problems will keep magnifying. The nature of the problems will keep changing. So CSR may never be sufficient. But the efficiency can always be improved. What you are doing right now, in the future, as a corporate house, you can always improve the manner in which you're doing it and the impact that you're creating. And here, a few examples that you should share. Now, it says it has an impact on the climate, environmental sustainability, and living conditions of human beings. So, give a few examples to show how CSR initiatives, again, what I said earlier, in the ethics paper, you people are rewarded for optimism. When you are rewarded for optimism, what does this mean? As far as possible, try to show the positive impact that CSR has brought. After you explain the positive impact, then conclude again by saying that it may never be sufficient. Whatever these companies are doing might not be sufficient, but the efficiency will always be improved in the future. For instance, in the domain of environment, consider a company like Adidas. As part of a CSR initiatives, all these companies that I mentioned here are collaborating with one NGO or the other. But that much space I don't have to write. I don't have to explain who they are collaborating with. For example, Adidas collaborates with an NGO called Parley for Oceans. But that much detail is not needed. What I need to focus on is that as part of its CSR initiative, Adidas manufactures shoes from material that has been reclaimed from the ocean, recycled material that is picked up by the oceans, from the oceans by this NGO. ONGC similarly is bringing about improvements in the environment. How is it doing that? By promoting what is that initiative called? I'm forgetting the name completely. It's a Hindi word which means that you're moving towards salvation, moksha something. I'm forgetting the name right now. Environment friendly crematoriums. These crematoriums use 60% less wood, and when you're using 60% less, 60%, that's more than half. This is going to significantly reduce air pollution. This is significantly going to reduce water pollution, because most of the remains after the cremation is over will be dispersed, will be immersed in the water. In the field of education, you can always mention the Wipro group, and what I was saying earlier, this is a group which spends 51% more, 51% more than the prescribed CSR limit by the government, and they focus primarily on higher education and skill building, so that more and more people can get the skills that are required to create sustainable, decent, respectable livelihoods for themselves. Another example you can give is in the field of healthcare, and here it is the NHPC. What does NHPC do? To promote universal healthcare, comprehensive healthcare, they provide it through mobile medical units. What does this ensure? This ensures accessibility for more and more people to good quality healthcare. And finally, in the field of nutrition, you can talk about Dabur. Dabur partners with Anganwadis across the country, ensuring that children and young mothers, young girls, are able to get good quality, nutritious food, improving their nutritional intake and reducing the possibility of malnutrition or any concurrent diseases. So again, more importantly, these are just examples. Most importantly over here, CSR may never be sufficient, but its efficiency can always be improved. Is it efficient and sufficient? Efficiency can be improved, and no, it can never be sufficient. We'll always have to keep doing more. This is your first part, which is your 6 questions asked from the theoretical part. Second part is case studies, section B of the paper. Now, before we start taking a look at case studies, let me first give you a broad overview of what exactly was asked and what are the fundamentals that you should keep in mind across all case studies to be able to do well. Now, this year there were 6 cases, and again, it's a what should I call it? It's a little disappointing that most of the case studies are so predictable. The situations change. Rohan will become Mohan, Sohan will become, will become something or the other. But largely the issues that are being talked about are more or less the same. There's very little diversity, there's very little challenge. which to some extent is good for you, is beneficial for you, but from the perspective of the paper, it's not very good. Nonetheless, in every case that you're given, first understand that there are three. We ask you what are the courses of action available, you evaluate them and decide what course of action you will take. Understand that there are three kinds of actions you can take. The first is the morally correct action. The morally correct action is correct, is right, but usually comes at a cost. A cost that is personal, a cost that is economic, a cost that may even be related to your safety or your well-being. Second option is an immoral action. Immoral action is easy, will give you some personal benefit or the other, but invariably is also wrong. Now, moral and immoral action, everyone understands. Most important part is inaction. I can do the right thing, I can do the wrong thing, or I can choose to do absolutely nothing. And you must remember, when it comes to inaction or even a delay in the action, this can sometimes be as bad or even worse than a wrong action. An act of omission can be as bad, as dangerous, as detrimental as even an act of commission. That's the first thing that you understand. Three broad responses that you have in most case studies. Number two, the same inaction that we are talking about, this is the point that you remember. Students, when they're writing case studies, they try not to take a very confrontationist attitude. They say that, sir, I don't want to get into a confrontation and into an argument. I want to write something that is simple, that is easy to implement. But again, this is the statement made by the famous poet Dante, that the darkest places in hell are reserved for those who maintain their neutrality in a time of moral crisis. When you know that something is evidently bad, it is your right and your responsibility to try to take the action that you are capable of. Third, under all circumstances, without hesitation, without argument, duty comes first. Now, there are some students who told me that, sir, someone or the other was telling me that duty towards your work and there is also duty towards your family. If there's a conflict between the two, what do I choose? Your familial responsibilities, your domestic chores, your domestic responsibilities, please put them on the side. Most importantly, under all circumstances, you will focus. What is your primary objective? Collective public welfare. Given a choice between personal duties, personal interest on the one hand, and public welfare on the other hand, without hesitation, without argument, collective public welfare will always take priority. If you're a personal businessman, if you're working in the private sector, if you're doing something else, maybe to some extent, your personal welfare could have been given precedence. As a civil servant, as a public servant, under all circumstances, public welfare takes top priority. Fifth and finally, remember that whatever is legal is not necessarily ethical. What do we mean by legal over here? Not only the law, but an order that is given to you, an instruction that is given by your superior. Just because a senior is saying something does not mean that it is the right thing to do. You're expected to obey orders. You're not expected to obey them blindly. Use your discretion, use your judgment, assess the nature of the order, and then decide what an appropriate response to that order would be. Some basic criteria that you keep in mind as far as case studies are concerned. Keeping this in mind, now let me look at some of the questions here. Case study number 8, again, very lengthy case, but I'm just focusing on the basics, the key parts of the case over here. This case talks about a person called Ramesh. Ramesh is an officer of the state civil services. He's been posted to the capital of the state, and the state is a border state. He's been working in the government for the last 20 years, and now he's posted as the director in the home department, which means that his portfolio is important. His designation is important. Important in what sense? That the decisions that he takes will impact a large proportion of the state's population, maybe even the country. Second, Ramesh's mother has been diagnosed with cancer, unfortunately, and at the moment has been admitted in a leading cancer hospital of the city. Third, he has 2 children, teenage children, and both of them have been admitted into one of the best schools in the city. Now, in this particular area, there have been reports of infiltration by illegal migrants from a neighboring country. Ramesh conducts a surprise inspection. During the inspection, he catches 2 families trying to infiltrate. These 2 families of 12 members each. He also realizes that in the entry of these migrants into India, there is the connivance of the security personnel. Not only the security personnel, that word is not written here, but it is indicated implicitly that even civil officials in the government are assisting these people in getting forged documents, Aadhaar card, passport, ration card, and so on, and helping them in settle in a particular area of the state. Ramesh now, he gets to know about this, so he prepares a detailed report and submits it to the additional secretary. The additional secretary goes through the report, summons Ramesh after a week and tells Ramesh that the higher authorities are not happy with your report and asks him to withdraw the report. He also tells Ramesh that if you do not withdraw this report, what will happen? You will be posted out from this prestigious appointment, and in the future, your chances of getting a promotion will be in jeopardy. Effectively, that if you do not withdraw this report, in the future, your mother's treatment of this cancer may have to be discontinued because you will get posted out. Your two children who are studying in a very good school right now, their welfare, their education would be interrupted. That's a personal cost. And at the same time, professionally also, you'll be posted out of here and your future promotions will be in jeopardy. In these circumstances, what are the options available? What should Ramesh do? What are the merits? What are the demerits? These are the questions we'll try to answer. But before we go to those questions, first understand again over here, case is very long. I have spent a lot of time reading it and now I have to write an answer. And of course, there are 6 case studies to cover. There are 5 questions given in this case. So for each question that I'm going in for, I have a rough word limit of about 50 words. I will have to be concise, I will have to be precise, and I will have to look at the same question, answer the same questions with at least 2 or 3 different perspectives. Without delay, starting with the first part. Now, in this question, the first question that you asked is, what are the options available to Ramesh, and evaluate their relative merits and demerits. Now, what are the options over here? 2 options fundamentally. He can withdraw the report or he can refuse to withdraw the report. Now, some student or the other will usually have a doubt over here that, sir, can we not say that we can delay the report? We will not withdraw the report, we will not refuse, but at the moment we'll spend some more time deciding what to do. That's exactly what we say. Inaction is also a very powerful action. And here, since I have very limited space, I will not discuss that. I will look at the more direct actions that you're taking, which is either withdraw or refuse to withdraw. Now, if you withdraw the report, what is the advantage? Personal benefit. Personal benefit in what sense? The mother's cancer treatment can be continued, children's education will not be interrupted, and your career is also stable. But what else? Continues to stay in the capital city, mother, children, and the promotion is assured. What is the demerit? Border state, illegal infiltration by migrants from another country. So, if he withdraws the report, this amounts to a dereliction of duties. If he withdraws the report, it endangers national security, and worst of all, Ramesh now starts going down a slippery slope. What is a slippery slope? That even if you start by doing something that you believe is a minor wrong, even if you do something wrong that seems to be very insignificant, very marginal, over a period of time, these kind of incidents will only keep increasing. Your seniors will keep making these kind of demands of you. You yourself will not be able to control yourself. Your personal interest will always take priority. So, without hesitation, without doubt, this is not the option that can be recommended. Second option is that Ramesh can refuse to withdraw the report. If he refuses to withdraw the report, what is the advantage? He is displaying dedication to duty. Second, he is preventing infiltration and connivance and corruption in the future. The security officials who are assisting these migrants, the civil officials who are assisting them in getting documents, they need to be supervised, scrutinized, and if required, appropriately punished. But what is the demerit over here? Number 1, personal hardships, and number 2, professional hardships. Mother and children on the personal front and the career advancement on the professional front. That is 2 questions covered over here. What are the available options and how would you evaluate them? Second, what course of action should Ramesh adopt? Without hesitation, and again, when we say be concise, when we say get to the point, right in the beginning itself, in the very first sentence of this part of your answer, please explain your fundamental answer. Under any circumstance, Ramesh must not withdraw the report. It's a matter of national security. It is a matter of doing his duties well. The report should not be withdrawn. What should Ramesh do? He should pursue the matter with higher authorities. Help them understand, sensitize them to the impact of ignoring such corruption within the security forces as well as the civil authorities. If nobody in the government is willing to listen to him, what did the secretary say? The secretary told him that higher authorities are not happy with your report. They are not very satisfied with the report. In this case, if the government does not support him, what can he do? He can also consider making a public interest disclosure, becoming a whistleblower. But this is not your first, this is your last resort. And why are we considering this resort? Or why are we considering this alternative? Because this is a matter of national security. When national security is being threatened, is being endangered. And why do we do this? The reasons for this: duty comes first, personal inconvenience is manageable. Even if he's being shifted out, now his mother is in the hospital, 2 children have been mentioned, a spouse has not been mentioned. But if he has a spouse, the wife can stay back in the city to take care of the children, to take care of the mother, while he can go to any other part of the state where the state government believes that he would be appropriately fitted. Third, career advancement cannot come at the expense of national security. And number four, the illegal infiltration has grave consequences on a social level, on an economic level, even on a political level. That part has got cut out, but on a social, on an economic, and on a political level. Which is why the report without hesitation must be submitted. Two more questions that are asked over here. What are the ethical dilemmas and what are the measures through which this infiltration can be combated? Now, what are the ethical dilemmas over here? 3 simple dilemmas, and this is literally again from the class notes. Literally you're picking up from there, but nonetheless, simple question. Conflict of interest. What is a conflict of interest? The definition we looked at earlier also. Where there's a conflict between personal interest on the one hand and professional or public interest on the other. In this case, for example, a conflict between his duties towards his family and his responsibilities towards his professional duty. Second, a crisis of conscience. What is a crisis of conscience? A situation in which a person, an individual sense of morality is different from the morality of others. And here, where is the difference? The morality of the individual as compared to the morality of higher officials or the system collectively. And the third dilemma, personal interest on the one hand or national interest on the other. When I try to maintain one, the other invariably might have to be compromised. And the last question over here, although very factual, very direct, something that you could have answered from your security issues classes, what steps can you take to prevent, to combat infiltration? Over here, simple answers, literally nothing to explain. Number one, that you must have a comprehensive integrated border management system. And what should this have? This should have good quality, high-tech surveillance. And number two, a dedicated communication network. Second, you must also have a border area development program, a border area development plan. Why? To improve the socio-economic conditions of people living on the borders. Why do we want to do that? To earn their support, which will be vital in combating infiltration, to strengthen our information networks. Third, implementation of the National Register of Citizens, which will make it easier for us to identify any illegal migrants. Fourth and finally, strengthen the protocol in the issuance of identity documents. If an Aadhaar card, if a ration card, if a voter ID card can be made very easily, a fake card can be made very easily, then the protocols, the procedures here need to be strengthened. Again, the question is very simple, largely based on common sense. 5 questions that were asked, which makes it very lengthy, which is why, as precisely as you can, ensure that there are 3-4 points in each of the questions that you asked. Writing 7 points under one heading and writing only 2 at the end, or ignoring a case completely, is far worse than writing brief answers over here. That's question number 8. Question number 9, again a long case study, but again let me focus on the more important elements. It starts by saying that the Supreme Court has been very concerned about stone mining in the Aravalli Hills. This case, I think they borrowed from an incident that happened just about a year and a half back in the state of Haryana. And the Haryana government, in response to that case, if you want to read about it, has created an entire set of standard operating procedures whenever this kind of mining is being reported. If you want, you can read that. It's fairly well written, small document. But coming back to the case, stone mining is prevalent in the Aravalli Hills. SP decides to stop this menace, finds a truck with stone trying to escape the area. The truck driver does not stop, runs over the SP, kills him, and the driver flees from the spot. FIR is filed, but for the last 3 months, there's been no progress on the case. Here, we're introduced to a person called Ashok. Ashok is an investigative journalist and he's working with a leading TV channel. He takes suo motu cognizance of this case and starts investigating. In 3 months, the police was able to find no breakthrough, but within 1 month, Ashok is able to prepare an investigative report. This report exposes the nexus that exists between the stone mafia, corrupt police and civil officials, and some politicians. This report is presented to the CMD to the chairman and managing director of the TV channel. Problem is that the person who's been accused in this report is the local MLA. The local MLA is part of the mafia but is very close to the chief minister and is the owner of this TV, is a relative of the owner of this TV channel. And most importantly, holds 20% share in this channel. Which is why the CMD tells Ashok to not make the report public. He says that if you do not make the report public, in the previous case, when we were talking about Ramesh, question number 8, the senior there was threatening him. In this case, we are tempting him. Earlier, when we were talking about probity in public life, we said that you should be immune to temptations and hardships, immune to temptations and threats. Now, there were threats over here, there are temptations over here. What is the temptation? That if you don't make this report public, number 1, your promotion is guaranteed, a pay hike is guaranteed. Number 2, Ashok has apparently taken a soft loan of 10 lakh rupees for his son's chronic disease. This will be suitably adjusted if he hands over the report to the CMD. What should Ashok do? And like I said, as we start discussing this answer, what I want you to understand again is that the broad structure of the answer will remain almost unchanged. A few details here and there will change, but largely the answer is the same. For an experienced student, that might be somewhat disappointing, but for a new student or a student preparing for the exam right now, that is quite welcome. Because once you understand the fundamentals, once you make that template, the same template can be used in any of these questions. Over here, what are the available options and how do you evaluate them? 2 options again, he can make the report public or he can choose not to make the report public. Now let's say he chooses not to make the report public. What is the benefit? Benefit is personal first. He gets a promotion, he gets a pay hike and the loan is taken care of. Number 2, there is no danger, there is no chance of retaliation by any vested interest. And number 3, he will get the continued patronage of his senior at the TV channel and of that MLA, maybe even the chief minister. Demerit, however, is that the stone mining will continue with impunity. The ecological damage that the stone mining will cause is irreversible and will be catastrophic in the long run. Second, this is injustice and disrespect to the supreme sacrifice made by the SP. The person, he promised to himself that he would stop stone mining. You are completely ignoring the sacrifice that he's made. And number 3, this nexus, the mafia, will only go stronger. Second option that Ashok has is to make the report public. If he makes the report public, what is the advantage? It strengthens supervision over any such mafia and there's a greater probability that accountability will be imposed. That those who are guilty will be scrutinized, will be interrogated and will be suitably punished. Number 2, in the future the nexus will be weakened and number 3, the local ecology, the local environment has a greater chance of being preserved. Problem, however, is personal cost. What is the personal cost? Personal cost is the son who has been mentioned as having a chronic disease. If the TV channel starts demanding that Ashok repays the loan sometime in the near future or changes the terms, the conditions, the interest rate of the loan, Ashok might not be able to manage that. Number 2, there are professional costs. Promotion may be denied, may be demoted, may even be fired. And number 3, there is a fear of retribution. The MLA in that mafia apparently is very well connected, has connections even going all the way to the chief minister, is a 20% owner of the TV channel, which means economically also he's fairly well, he's fairly prosperous. And now from such people, there is a genuine fear of retaliation, victimization or retribution. These are the available options and their evaluation. Question more importantly is, what should Ashok do? And as we said in the last case also, without hesitation, he must make the report public. If this, now when we say that you make the report public, if the TV channel does not agree, he can always approach other media outlets. If he believes that nobody is willing to help him out, because the MLA is very powerful, if he believes that nobody is helping him out, he can always approach government authorities, give them the report that he is prepared. Based upon the facts of the report, he can ask them to conduct a more thorough and a formal investigation. Number 4, the chief minister is involved in the case. There is always the possibility. Nothing has been alleged against the chief minister, but if the chief minister wants to use his clout to interfere with this investigation, in this case, Ashok can always approach the court, file a PIL, and seek judicial intervention. This is the course of action that he can adopt. And why should he adopt it? What are the reasons for this? Reasons for this, because number 1, the long-term ecological damage is irreversible. The consequences can be disastrous. Number 2, because if he does not make the report public, he dishonors the sacrifice made by the SP and he significantly lowers the morale of the police and of government personnel. Even if he believes that there might be only a few people who are honest, these few honest people also will be significantly discouraged, demoralized if this report is not made public. And number 3, because omission can be as dangerous or even more dangerous than commission. When you know that something is wrong, if you do not take the right action, that sometimes can be a very powerful action with terrible consequences. Which is why he must make the report public. What are the ethical dilemmas in this case? And if you compare this answer written here with the answer given for question number 8, the answer is more or less the same with minor changes, because the nature of the question was almost identical. There's a conflict of interest here again, personal duty on the one hand, professional on the other, crisis of conscience between the individual and the system, and on the one hand is personal interest, on the other hand is the ecological balance. I can keep my career safe, I can take care of the sun, but at that time I will have to significantly violate the local ecology of this area. The question also asks, again a very factual question, what kind of training will you give to officers who are posted in areas? In fact, the exact question is, what is the training that you would suggest for police officers who are posted to stone mining districts? And as I said, a very good source of this is the set of standing operating procedures created by Haryana. Now here, 3 or 4 points you can mention. Number 1, the training that is given to police officers who are to be posted in these areas must teach them how to build community outreach and gather local support. Because local support, local information will be very important in identifying cases of stone mining and dealing with them more proactively and more promptly. Number 2, they must teach officers how to identify signs of mining. What are signs of mining? For example, rat holes. Where you see rat holes, there's a high probability that illegal mining is going on. And what can you do? Very simply, into those rat holes, seal them completely, for example, by pouring concrete. But for that, you have to first identify where these rat holes are, where that mining is happening. Number 3, maintain effective coordination with other departments. They say police officers, who do we want them to maintain coordination with? With the forest department, with the mining department and so on. 4th, use technology to maintain surveillance of vulnerable areas. Officers must know how to use technology. What kind of technology? For example, drones. And 5th, any such training must teach them to identify the nexus between the suppliers, between the purchasers and the consumers of these products. A major problem that the world was witnessing just about 35 years back was the purchase across the world of what we call conflict diamonds. What are conflict diamonds? Diamonds mined in Africa, but diamonds mined at a terrible human cost. government agencies, international agencies realized that they were not very powerful, they were not very effective against suppliers. They realized they were not even very effective against purchasers. Who were the purchasers? Large diamond conglomerates. But they realized they could be very effective with consumers. And with consumers, what did they do? For conflict diamonds, they started highlighting the ethical and moral consequences, the ethical and moral implications of buying diamonds that were tainted with someone's blood. And that is what police officers here should be taught, to identify the nexus between the suppliers, purchasers, and consumers, helping them understand which of these three links in the chain they can most easily and most effectively target. So, some steps that can be recommended for the training of police officials here. Case study. One last question that I need to discuss over here is case study number 11. This question, compared to the other two case studies that I discussed, is still somewhat challenging. This case is talking about a person called Rakesh. Rakesh recently has been appointed as the Joint Commissioner in the City Transport Department. Now, there's a case that has come up before him. In this case, there was a government driver who was driving a bus. The bus was involved in an accident with a car driver. Car was being driven by a middle-aged man. Both of them got into an altercation, got into an argument, they exchanged blows. Both of them were so seriously injured that they had to be taken to a nearby hospital. The driver unfortunately succumbed to the injuries and died. The middle-aged car driver was kept in hospital for a day. He was also critical, but he recovered and therefore he was discharged. Police investigation shows that the quarrel was started by the bus driver and it was he who had resorted to physical violence. As a result of this, the management of the City Transport Department is considering not giving any extra compensation to the driver's family. Who is the driver's family? He is survived by a wife and two daughters who are in the school or college going age, roughly, which means in their teenage. The family is very aggrieved, is very depressed, is even agitated against the discriminatory and apathetic attitude of the CTD management. As a result, the workers' union of the City Transport Department have gone on strike. The strike has been continuing for the last 10 days and they have two demands. Number one, that the management must provide full extra compensation as is given to other employees who die on duty. And number two, employment to at least one family member of this driver's family. In these circumstances again, what are the options, how will you evaluate them, and what option should finally be adopted? Now, what is the fundamental problem in this case? When we say now here, the last part over here, the union demand is the same, that you must give this family extra compensation as is given to other drivers who died on duty, which means that the City Transport Department usually gives extra compensation. In this case, why are they hesitating or why are they reluctant? Because of two reasons given over here. The quarrel was started by the driver, a government driver, and it was he who resorted to physical violence first. Now, if I ignore what he has done is definitely wrong. If I as the management ignore what he has done, what are we doing? We are establishing a very bad precedent. Because in the future, government officials, government servants, government employees will start taking the law into their own hand, which explains the reluctance of the management in awarding that extra compensation. Now, in this case, what are the options that are available? In this case, and that's why I said this was still somewhat challenging, somewhat better. This case now, the management has three options. They can refuse all the demands, they can accept some of the demands, or they can accept all the demands in that sequence, in that chronology. If you refuse all the demands of the family, what is the merit? It sets a very strong precedent. It displays a lot of grit, a lot of resolve, that if a government employee does something wrong, no matter what the consequences thereafter, this will not be taken leniently. It will be dealt with very strictly by the department, by the management. What is the demerit? That to some extent, the department now can be accused of a lack of compassion. The driver is no more. Even if he did something wrong, at the end of the day, it is his family who will pay the price. a widowed lady and her two daughters will have to pay a heavy, very heavy price, because for the rest of their lives they might not be able to sustain themselves. A lack of compassion. Second, there is going to be sustained public inconvenience. Here, let me just take a small pause. There are many people who say that, sir, in case studies, should we write a list of stakeholders? Absolutely not. Don't waste your time, don't waste your words. Please answer the questions directly. Over here, for example, there's some people who, I don't know who's saying this, but some people are advocating that you first write a list of all the stakeholders. It's a sheer waste of time. You please get to the question directly. It's very clear that if the city transport department goes on strike, buses will not run, government buses will not run in the city, and the people will be inconvenienced. Second option that you have is that you can accept some of the demands. If some of the demands are accepted, what is the advantage? The strike can be called off and the family's welfare also can be ensured. What is the demerit? That convincing the union or convincing the family might not be easy. The negotiation is not going to be easy to execute. And third, you can accept all the demands. If you accept all the demands, what is the advantage? Family's welfare is protected, strike is called off, and public welfare is restored. They will call off the strike and then go back to work. People will not be inconvenienced anymore. What is the disadvantage? That this promotes a culture of insubordination. The management was considering not giving extra compensation. The union immediately went on strike. They did not try to negotiate, they did not try to reason, they did not care about the impact this strike would have on many people living in the city who are now suffering, who are getting inconvenience, who are facing problems for no fault of theirs. And number two, this establishes a very bad precedent because this insubordination will continue even in the future. Therefore, what option should the management take? What option should they adopt? Number one, the management should start by identifying the sacred issues. What are the sacred issues? Issues that are non-negotiable. That these are issues on which the management cannot compromise. What can it not compromise? Number one, that the management cannot be held to ransom for any demand, legitimate or illegitimate. You cannot threaten the management with a strike wherever you believe that they are not listening to your demands. Number two, the public cannot be inconvenienced. A driver who got into an accident, accidents will happen on roads. But a government driver who resorts to violence, a government driver who starts a fight, is not the kind of government employee we would ideally want to nurture. And yet, you're going on strike. So, this is non-negotiable. However, at the moment, we are in a difficult situation. Therefore, what should they do? They should adopt a grid strategy. What is a grid strategy? A gradual reduction in tension. How do you gradually reduce the tension? By granting concessions, by granting some concessions. What does this mean? That the number three, that the management can take the moral high ground by granting some concessions publicly, not in private, not behind closed doors, publicly to the union by accepting the demands partially. What demand can you accept? Now there are two demands here and you don't necessarily have to make a choice between the two. Number one is extra compensation and number two is a job. If the management wants, what if the management deny? Extra compensation. The demand for a job for a family member was raised by the union. So if you want, you can just give them the extra compensation, but not the job. Or you can say that on compassionate grounds, we are willing to give a job, but to maintain the sanctity of procedures, norms that we've established, the extra compensation will be denied. That is non-negotiable, but the job will be given. One of the two. Accept the demands partially. And accept these demands publicly to claim the moral high ground. What does this mean? That when the management publicly announces that they are willing to give some concessions, it now creates moral pressure upon the union to justify to the people why they are still not recalling their strike. And number four, these concessions that you're giving will be conditional upon the immediate resumption of transport services. And if even these options do not work, as a last resort, the CTD, the City Transport Department, can also invoke the Essential Services Maintenance Act, compelling the employees to resume their work to ensure that public welfare is not compromised anymore. Why should you do this? Because again, simple reasons. Number one, government employees should not take the law into their own hands. Number two, why are you accepting the demands partially? Because the government should be the bigger person. Why should you be the bigger person? Why should you take the moral high ground? To ensure sustained public welfare and the welfare of the employee's family. And at the same time, why are you accepting it only partially? Because the government cannot be seen as buckling under pressure. It cannot be, because if the employees believe that the government is buckling under pressure, they are succumbing to the threat of the strike. This in the future will create a very bad culture in the department, and that will threaten the existence of the department as well as the welfare of the family, the employees, and the citizens. One last question that was asked in this case. What are the ethical dilemmas? And again, as we've done in the last two cases also, fairly simple, 3 points. Well-being of the family on the one hand and the work culture of the city transport department on the other. Public welfare on the one hand and the risk of going down a slippery slope by accepting the demands on the other. Number 3, compassion towards the family on the one hand and the spirit of the law, that employees should not take the law into their own hands, the spirit of law on the other. And that is your question number 11. Thank you very much.